at the University of California, San Diego, her MDiv at Princeton Theological Seminary. She did a THM at Duke Divinity School, then back to Princeton for her PhD, and now she teaches at Duke. In addition to shelter theology, she's also written Counseling Depressed Women and Caring Cultures, How Congregations Care for the Sick. Susan is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church USA. She's been a pastor to churches in the Presbyterian of Baltimore, so this is not a foreign place for her. And she now serves as parish associate at First Presbyterian Church of Durham, North Carolina. Would you join me in welcoming Susan Dunlap? Susan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your warm welcome and for shepherding me through this whole process. It is a joy and an honor to be here. I was thinking back to the last time I was here, and I was in a wedding here about 40 years ago. So I imagine things have grown and evolved since I was here last, and I look forward to going to worship later on.
No, because she's not on Zoom.
Yeah, so let's see here. About 15 years ago, I was teaching pastoral care at Duke Divinity School and teaching the arts of care, teaching future pastors how to care for the bereaved and the lonely and the unemployed and the confused and people with all sorts of problems. And so I realized that I was not engaged in the practice of pastoral caregiving. I wasn't engaged in the practice of what I was teaching students to do, and that I wanted to be doing pastoral care if I was teaching it. And so I went to Urban Ministries of Durham. I could have volunteered at a church or in a hospital, but I decided I wanted to work among Durham's poorest of the poor. And so I went to one of two emergency shelters in Durham, North Carolina, and said, I'd like to be your chaplain and you don't have to pay me. And so they said, come on board. And so I've been there for about 15 years. So let me tell you a little bit about Urban Ministries. It's very typical homeless shelter sponsored mostly by mainline churches. There's a men's dorm and a women's dorm and a cafeteria and a food pantry and a clothing closet, sort of an all-purpose shelter for people without homes. There are also social workers, there are mental health counselors, people there helping people without homes find housing, medical clinic, recovery program, referrals, and so forth. So there are a number of services for people without homes, but they didn't have a chaplain. And so I went to Urban Ministries to be their chaplain, and I discovered what, of course, is true. I discovered the reality of just how difficult it is to survive homelessness. There are the elements that you have to survive, the heat in the summer, the cold and the rain, snow. There's the shame, people blaming you for your poverty, for your homelessness, for the condition that you're in. Violence. If you live without a home, you are so vulnerable, particularly women who are living in the bushes or in a parking garage or in a park. You're so exposed to violence. And then there's the loneliness. It's profoundly lonely if you don't have a home, if you don't have a place where people can find you, a place to receive letters, a place to gather as a community. And also, what I learned is that leaving homelessness is really hard too. It's not that you walk into the homeless shelter and say, well, I've decided that I want to live inside now. It's not like that. Multiple appointments, multiple rejections, not everything works out. Unanswered phone calls. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, I'm waiting for my social worker to call back. Lots and lots of waiting and lots of disappointment. And then, of course, there's a lot of necessity to develop new habits, develop new skills. So leaving homelessness and surviving homelessness are both a challenge. One of the discoveries that I made is that you need a lot of internal grit in order to both survive and leave. One person that was in a program that I was leading dropped out of the program because he said, I have failed too many times and I just cannot bear to fail again. Okay, so a kind of spiritual core of hope, belief that something good can come out of my efforts, dignity, a sense that I am worth these services, I am worth putting all of this effort into changing my life, a sense of purpose, that my life and my suffering in the long run will serve the good, will serve something good in the long run. And courage. It takes a lot of courage to try on new behaviors. It takes a lot of courage to step out into the unknown. And these are all spiritual qualities, right? These are all qualities that the spiritual life nurtures and cultivates. And so even though I was working in a shelter that had multiple quality services, I realized that there was something else that people needed in order to both survive their homelessness and get out of homelessness, and that was a spiritual life, spiritual support. They needed to cultivate hope, dignity, purpose, and courage. The first thing I did was start a prayer service 3 times a week. It was a particular kind of prayer service. It was not structured according to any particular tradition or any format that followed a bulletin. The only structure was come forward, light a candle, and say a prayer. So there was a basket of candles and a big band, and people would come forward, take a candle, light it, and put it in the sand. It was the only structure. Come forward, light a candle, say a prayer. It was completely non-sectarian. And the reason I'm saying was is because COVID pretty much shut everything down. We're limping along, but we're not in our full-blown prayer service mode. So non-sectarian, you can see here in our publicity, everyone is welcome at this service. Whether you're Baptist, Pentecostal, Methodist, Catholic, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, or from another tradition, or from no tradition at all, or have not yet decided, you are welcome. You are welcome in this place. So my original plan was to have a darkened room, soft music, maybe piano music playing in the background, place for people to come in for wordless meditation, maybe go forward and say a brief prayer for my children. I might find a place to live. It was meant to be an environment where people could approach the mystery of the divine, the mystery of God in whatever way was theirs. Well, instead of my rather Taizé-oriented service, people brought their own religious forms, all right? People were in exile from their religious forms when they were staying at the shelter, and they brought their religion with them. And so we heard testimonies and brief sermons, formulaic prayers, singing. People would make up songs. Sometimes people would sing familiar gospel songs that everyone can join in with. And instead of my receiving the mystery of the divine model, there was proclamation of the certainty of God at work in the world. In addition to the prayer service, I had a jewelry class and a knitting class. We marched in the Christmas parade. I brought in guest speakers. We had guest musicians. I had memorial services for people that died and weren't going to have a memorial service anywhere else. My favorite thing that I did was I had a drumming class for people to come in and practice drumming. So of course I had to change course. I had to reconceive my ministry and how I would respond to people who were hurting at the service. Most of the people, 80% of the people at the shelter were African American. 90% of the people who came to my service were African American. And I realized I had to adjust my responses to their concerns, their stories of struggle, and so forth. So instead of praying my carefully crafted prose paragraphs that tried to articulate the reality of their pain and the reality of God's power and presence, I realized that what they were saying to each other to encourage each other took the form of sayings and proverbs. God can make a way out of no way. Let go and let God, and so forth. And my efforts to explain God's presence did not have nearly the impact as these familiar sayings and proverbs, which I thought was really interesting. I tried to express empathy. This is what I taught my students in pastoral care. Always the first move is empathy. It looks like this is really hard for you. I can see that you're feeling afraid now. In the prayer service, not much reaction, but a proclamation of the power and presence of God, that got a big reaction. And then finally, in pastoral care, we are recovering the power of lament in the Psalms. My God, why have you forsaken me? You know, I am a worm, I can count my bones. And we're teaching in pastoral care that you need to give language for people to express their suffering before God. And furthermore, this has been done by generations and generations, including in the scriptures, in the Psalms. However, when I tried to introduce lament as a way of responding to their hardship, they were not interested. They were interested in gratitude and saying, I thank God. I thank God for waking me up this morning in my right mind. He didn't have to do it, but he did, okay? Gratitude was a much more frequent response. And of course, when you think about it, it makes sense. Those of us who go home to a warm bed at night, have regular meals, and have regular resources to call upon, we can afford to slide into a free-flowing lament. It's not as terrifying. But when you have nothing at all, practices of gratitude turn your gaze from lack to what remains, okay? It turns your gaze from what is absent to what is present. So it makes sense. I became interested in the forms of their expressions as well as the content of their beliefs, and particularly what they would say to each other for encouragement, for comfort, for strength. What did they call upon to tell each other in their own idiom that would be encouraging? Well, again, proverbs and sayings. I collected them. These are some of them. God can make a way out of no way. The devil is real. God's time, not my time. Don't let the devil steal your joy. No weapon formed against me shall prosper, and so on. So the form Proverbs and Sayings was something very prominent. Another prominent form was testimony. In other words, telling a personal story as an account of God's many blessings, okay? Telling the story of your life, telling the story of what happened as an account of how God has showered you with support. And furthermore, another element of testimony is that it's told for the upbuilding of the community. It's not just a report. This is what God has been doing for me. It is told to encourage other people by saying, if God gave me a place to live, God will give you a place to live as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about Joyce. That's Joyce. I've sort of occluded her face. This is a picture from our website, so it's in the public realm. I interviewed Joyce for my book. I called upon interviews as well as my experience in the prayer service for writing my book. And Joyce was one of the people that I interviewed. Now, here's what the world would say about Joyce. Joyce is a chronically homeless Black woman, a prostitute and drug addict who repeatedly cheats social services. She will not get a job. She does not care about her family, education, morality, her health, or even being a productive member of society. Okay? That's what the world would say about who Joyce is. So let me show you what Joyce said about herself in testimonial form. I'm going to read this. It's a bit long, but I'll read it to you. I got baptized when I was 12. I got pregnant when I was 19 and went to my church to have my baby baptized. They wouldn't do it because she was out of wedlock. So I turned right around, never went back to church, never. I'm not going to your church if you can't christen my baby. I had started getting into drugs. God allowed me to see that if I stayed in New York, I'm going to kill myself with drugs. So I moved to North Carolina. I met my husband in the streets. It was during the time when I was selling my body, getting high. I actually fell in love with him in the streets. We dated for 18 years and we've been married for 7. I've done some of everything. I've done retail, I've done cashier, I've done stock. I took care of Alzheimer's patients and I loved it. I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. I took care of them like they belonged to me. I was chronically homeless for years, always at an overnight. I came back one day too late. They threw everything away. Even with all the important documents and the pictures that they threw away, you know what hurt me most? The worst? My Jesus calling and Bible promises for women. That hurt so bad. I read Our Daily Bread, inspirational books, the Bible itself, and then when certain things come up, come on, baby, pray. I love documentaries. I'm a geek. I'm really a geek. I'll turn my grandson into a geek. He's a World War II buff like me. I just rely on God. Every morning before I leave out that dorm, I read the whole armor of God. Every morning. And I still get frustrated. I still get upset. But then I say, okay, who am I? I am a trooper. And I know God's got me. It looks so dim, but I've been told by many ministers that when it looks that way, he's right there at your back. I have to count on that because looking at things, it's so bleak, I would give up. That's why I said, I know God's got me. So this is an alternative rendering of who Joyce is through testimonial form. And Joyce does not use the testimonial form to hide a lot of the truth of who she is. She talked about being on the streets. She talked about selling her body. She talked about using drugs. She talked about being chronically homeless. But her whole story was caught up in God's story, in the story of God who never lets us go, and the story of God who redeems our suffering, and the story of God who promises a future with God. Another thing about the testimony that I think is clear is that it includes nuances of her life that the world's story does not tell. The world's story paints a broad, condemning brush of who she is. Her story includes being with the same man for 18 years, loving to work with Alzheimer's patients, taking care of them as if they belonged to her. She loved her grandchildren. She is a self-described geek. She's turning her grandson into a geek as well. So this testimonial form is a form that is dignifying, it's hope-giving. If God has done this for me throughout my life, then God will surely continue to be with me and help me with my struggles in the future. And again, it's not told to hide who she is. It's told to tell her who she is. Father Gregory Boyle, who you may have heard of, who wrote Tattoos on the Heart, he said that he speaks of a compassion that can stand in awe of what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Stand in awe at all the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. I think that's very profound. So I have talked about the forms of their expression. I want to talk a little bit about the content of their beliefs. They have a strong sense that God will provide. Now, let me back up. People without homes are not perfect. They are not any less sinful than any of the rest of us. But I do think that among the people in my prayer service, there was a certain quality of belief, that a deep down belief that God will provide what they need. So God will provide. I thank God. Again, practices of gratitude are very important. The devil is real. I heard that many times. So that was sort of curious to me, because I had not grown up in a home that told me that the devil is alive and well and out there and doing things to me and to our family. But it was absolutely universal among the people that I worked with. And so I wondered why that was. Well, I noticed that the devil was often blamed for feelings of temptation to use again, to relapse. The devil was used to explain your own personal failures or the failures of somebody else. It was also used as a category to talk about larger problems and suffering and evil in the world. So the war in Ukraine is the work of the devil. The fact that my favorite bus route was canceled because of lack of funds. The fact that there's a lot of gun violence in Durham. that was put on, that was made the devil's responsibility. So I've thought a lot about that, and my conclusion is that people who have experienced the brunt of the world's evil much more than I have, evils of poverty and violence, not having a home to live, that they have an authority to speak about the devil that is greater than mine. Okay? Their experience of the brunt of the world's injustices is much more vivid than mine. And so I will defer to them when they speak of the devil. They also believe that God has a purpose for their lives, and even though that purpose seems obliterated at this moment in my experience of not having a place to live, I nevertheless believe that God is preparing me for something. And a lot of them believed that God is using this experience, this hardship of homelessness, to prepare them for to help other people in the future. And one guy was particularly convinced that he was being prepared for to care for youth. Now, there were some surprising scarcities. I never heard any theodicy questions. In other words, if God is so good and so loving and so powerful, why am I suffering? I never heard that. I never heard struggle between science and religion, like, well, how does God help me if you know, is God really real, or is can we prove God with science? No. No questioning of the authority of the Bible. And one theologian really explained that to me. He said, when people live under oppressive structures, they turn to the Bible for the strength to survive another day. The Bible is not read with the intellectual curiosity of solving cosmic mysteries. Rather, they look to the text to find guidance in dealing with everyday life, a life usually marked by struggles and hardship. Okay? So faith wasn't about trying to make everything rationally consistent. Faith was about survival. So just to wrap up and give you my final conclusion about what I think is important to the churches, and that is that I think we need to get proximate. You may have seen some of Brian Stevenson's work on just mercy, seen maybe his TED Talks, or he's given lots of presentations. But one of his primary messages is that we need to get proximate to the margins. We can't just stay where we are comfortable. We need to go to the margins where people are on the edge of survival. And why? Because it's about kinship with the poor, not service to them from afar. Father Boyle again said, the measure of our kindness lies not in our service to those on the margins, but in our kinship with them. Not in our service, but in forming relationships of kinship. I also place myself among people who believe that God dwells on the margins, among the poorest of the poor, in a way that God is not anywhere else. So we as Presbyterians believe God is everywhere, all the time, right? But the scriptures describe a God who is deeply concerned with the poor, who calls people of faith to be with the poor, to be mindful of the poor. When Jesus gave his declaration of what he and his ministry were all about, he said, Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has told me to bring good news to the poor. good news to the poor. There's something particular about being on the margins that where we can find God, okay? Now, I believe God, no one of us has a monopoly on where God is, right? We can find God, I think, in the art museum, in the parks, but there's a particular way that we know God when we dwell among people on the margins. And then finally, the final reason to get proximate is one of the things Quinn said, is that we have so much to learn from their faith. We have so much to learn about depending on God from people who have nothing else to depend on. They don't have any money. They were sleeping outside last night and everything was stolen. They don't have an ID. They don't have their picture of their children. They don't have any clothes. They have nothing. And those are the conditions under which dependence on God and God alone are fostered. The experience of being utterly powerless in terms of the world's power fosters habits of dependence on God and God alone. Let's see. There was a woman who came into the prayer service and she looked sort of disheveled, and I said, well, how are you doing? And she said, I slept in my car last night. I'm really tired. And I said, well, what got you through the night? And if any of you have been in psychotherapy or have been a psychotherapist, you know that that's a question that is often asked. Like, in other words, it helps the person name their resources, name their sources of resilience and strength. But she did not say, oh, well, I dug deep down inside and I found that I could get through this, or I thought of my mother, or she said one word, God. I said, what got you through the night? And she said, God. And I believe that. I believe God did get her through the night, and I believe she believed it with all her heart, that that was the only thing that got her through the night. I want to tell you a story about a man who came into the prayer service, and he went forward, he lit a candle, and he said, I want to pray for my girlfriend. She was shot 5 times in the head, and she's in the hospital. And I was mute. I had nothing in my repertoire to respond to that with. I'd never been in that situation of hearing about someone who had been shot 5 times in the head. But while I was standing there, frozen, around the prayer service room, I heard, thank you, God. Thank you, Jesus. Oh, God is good. Praise God. Shocked the heck out of me. The service continued, and I asked some of them afterwards, I said, why did you praise God after he said his girlfriend had been shot 5 times in the head? And they said, because she's still alive. Because she's still alive. So those are spiritual habits developed under very difficult circumstances that we can learn from, Finally, I asked the question of who is the church called to be? And these are the words of Pope Francis. I prefer a church which is bruised, hurting, and dirty because it has been out on the streets, rather than a church which is unhealthy from being confined and from clinging to its own security. So I think the challenge to all of us is to get proximate, to get out on the margins and find God, strengthen our faith. Thank you all. Thank you all so much.
Susan, thank you. Wow. There's a lot to talk about, and I've already been lobbied for the first question from Jim.
My question is about proximity. Most of us interact with the homeless at traffic lights or on the street or when we pass homeless shelters like camps.
Right.
What should we do? Should we give them scripture verses or money or food? I mean, what should we do?
Well, there are two ways to answer that. One is just the immediate answer. The guy's there at your window. What do I do? I don't give money to people who in Durham who ask me for money when I'm at a stoplight, because Durham's social services are not perfect, but they're not too bad either. And I feel like if I give them money, I am paying them not to get services, not to go find treatment for health issues, mental health issues, substance abuse disorder, and so forth. So I don't give money. I always speak to them. I've gotten to know some of them. There's one guy on the corner that I probably first met him 20 years ago. He was a young man. He was handsome and healthy looking. And I thought, why is he here? You know, panhandling. And over the 20 years, I have seen him deteriorate into a broken down, scarred, skinny, sort of heartbreaking person. And I always greet Keith every time I see him. Ask how he's doing, ask if he's been to see his girlfriend in Atlanta, and so forth. So I really focus on relationships rather than giving them anything. But some people give out water or a piece of paper that says, here's the nearest shelter. That's what I do. So that's the short term. And then in the long term, I need your all's help and help of the people in the churches, because I believe there's something about coming together to pray as equals with people who are without homes that is transforming for them and transforming for us. But the question is, how do you set that up? How do you set that up? I was fortunate because I was usually the only white person in the room. I'm older. All of those things sort of established me as a bit more vulnerable than the average person. And so that offset some of the great differential between us. And I think we were able to have relatively equal relationships before God. But I don't know how to set that up at a church-wide level. And I invite your imagination to know how to do that.
A question on testimony. From your presentation, I understand that for these homeless people, their testimony to each other is helpful to each other. How about your testimony? From a very different background, do you offer your testimony in those circumstances as well?
That's a great question. And I do try, again, to participate as a peer. And while I don't talk about sleeping in the bushes last night, I'll talk about my father dying and how difficult that is. I'll talk about when my daughter was giving me trouble. And I will talk about what God is doing in my life, in my daughter's life, for my father, and so forth. So yes, I do. What's behind your question? I'm curious.
It's in a room of need and poverty. Does my testimony sound boasting?
Oh, you mean if I say, wow, I just saw on Zillow that my house is worth $85 million. Holy cow, that's pretty amazing. No, I usually talk about health or issues that they could face, loving your parents, health, your kid getting a little wild, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation.
Sure.
I don't know if you know, but National Presbyterian Church is one of the major partners of Central Union Mission here in Washington, D.C., which is only 2 blocks away from Union Station. I don't have a question, but I have an answer
Good.
to Ginny's question.
Okay.
Some of you know that I'm on the board of Central Union Mission, and we have compassion cards. So when someone approaches you, or you pass by a homeless person, and they ask for money, you're correct. Central Union Mission says don't give money, but give them a compassion card, which reads food, beds, showers, social work, doctor, dentist, programs, chapel, 2 blocks from Union Station, and it has the address. That's one of the practical answers. So next week, I will be here with a stack of these cards to give out.
Yay.
Put them in your pocket, put them in your purse, put them in your car. Have a whole stack in your car. So when people come by, you give it to them. And you've done just the most basic thing that you can possibly do to answer the question of what can I do to help folks?
Right. And have a conversation with them.
That's right.
Even if it's just, boy, it sure is hot today, isn't it? Or one of the things I use to get a conversation started is, are you from Durham? Are you living around here? And that'll usually get a conversation going, yeah.
Notice there seems to be, among these homeless people, a lack of being responsible for themselves, and they want somebody else to do it. How do you figure that out, to help them to think, I'm responsible for what's happening?
By the time they come to Urban Ministries, where I am, their health is ground down, their sense of worth is ground down. Probably a lot of them, just have burned a lot of bridges with people in their family or friends because they have stolen everything they have, or they've been, abandoned their children or something. These are not perfect people. And so when I talk about learning from their faith, I'm not talking about learning from their habits. So your question is, tell me again what your question is. How do you get them to be responsible for their life? Well, I'll tell you, okay, I'll respond to that as a chaplain first. So one of the things I realized as a chaplain is that there are all these other people, social workers, healthcare workers, and so forth. But I was the only person who did not have an agenda for their life. Everybody else wanted them to call back, wanted them to get clean, wanted them to do all these other things. My job as a chaplain was to simply be with them, and in so doing, communicating the love and steadfast presence of God. So that's my response as a chaplain. Social workers have all sorts of ways of motivating people and helping people do the kinds of things that they need to do. But so many of them are so hurt or so, what is the word? I don't want to say damaged, but that's kind of a pejorative word. But they are really ground down, and they need lots of support and love in order to even take the first step.
Thank you so much for coming today. My first reflection is that you're benefiting in your ministry from a culture that is maybe passing us chronologically. You've got an older group of African Americans who've been raised in churches that have these influences. So I'm just curious how that would change if you were West Virginia, where there are very few African Americans at one point. Secondly, going back to the old book, Box of Charity, you emphasize the importance of learning from your clients, okay? Mm-hmm. And then my observation there is it also provides you an awful lot of feedback to the services that are provided by your shelter. Mm-hmm. Okay. And thirdly, just to build on what Serge says, our church is involved in several ministries through missions and homeless. Mm-hmm. We have cards also. Mm-hmm. We've given those for years with little Ziploc bags in our glove compartment that have chewy bars, and every time we see someone, we give them. And then when we're hungry, we also have something.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And if that is an introduction to a relationship of kinship, as Father Gregory Boyle says, that is so fabulous. Yeah, it's so wonderful. About your first question about West Virginia, that's my next research project. I mean, obviously, my people are from Southern Black evangelical churches. What is it like in Seattle? What's it like in New York, West Virginia, Dallas? So I trust you will help me find a grant to do that research. Maybe National Presbyterian has that kind of money laying around. Yes.
Susan, I'm curious. So obviously you started this prayer meeting with some preconceptions, and you learned from that it wasn't necessarily the right preconception. How have you taken that back to your teaching and your counseling of other ministers who are about to go out into the world? Yeah. How has it changed your teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first way, of course, is that you have to start with a lot of listening, that you need to be little mini ethnographers when you go into a new place to find out the symbols, the beliefs, the rituals that are already there and how they function. Now, you may find that some of those beliefs function poorly, that they foster judgment or exclusiveness or passivity. So, the belief God will provide possibly could foster passivity. Well, I'm not going to do anything. God's just going to take care of it all. So not only do you have to be an ethnographer and see what beliefs are out there, you have to see how they're functioning, right? Are they functioning to foster passivity, or are they empowering? Another problem that I always look for passivity and also judgment. So when you talk about the devil is real, is that functioning to foster discord in this homeless service and judgment and exclusion? Or is it a way to name evil and bring it into a narrative where God has conquered evil? So those two things: one, see what the beliefs and forms are, and two, see how they're functioning. Yeah, good question. Yes.
An observation and then a question. I thought it was interesting that the Durham Urban Ministries didn't have a chaplain.
Yeah.
And then my question is, in your work, do you ever, when you're working with homeless people, do you feel guilty because you have a home? And, it's like, you invite people over to your house, there's I'll let it speak for itself.
Okay, well, those are some sore points. No, of course I do. I feel terrible all the time, but then there's something sort of snarky in me that says, well, yes, I have all this stuff and I'm going down here. How can I really be their chaplain? And I think, well, you know what? Nobody else is doing it. I'm the only one who is stepping out here to do anything at all. And I'm going to fling myself on the grace of God and hope that in all my imperfections, I'm able to be a channel of grace. What was the second question? Oh, okay. Well, there are other people who live in my house too, and they're not as much of a fan of bringing people over as I am. And I definitely would. I'd have meals there. I'd have people over for coffee and conversation and everything, but I'm not the only one that lives there. So I don't do that.
What is it like? What is life like in a shelter? I've heard homeless people say, I refuse to go to a shelter because it's too dangerous. I mean, I find it hard to believe that sleeping in a shelter is more dangerous than sleeping on the street, but what do I know? I mean, what is it like? I assume there's some kind of supervision. I assume there are clean bathrooms. Do I get free meals? Can I just sit there all day, or can I only be there at night? How long can I stay? A whole series of questions like that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, I'll tell you about mine. I'm sure there's an enormous variety. You know, there are the rescue missions, which are different from urban ministries. Rescue missions, you have to work. There are required attendance at a Bible study. You have to go to church. You have to pray before meals and so forth. So that's a very religiously structured place. In my place, there's the men's dorm, which is just a room full of a bunch of bunk beds. You have to go through a metal detector in order to get in there. We give 3 meals a day. I've also heard people say it's dangerous at the shelter. They say you can buy any kind of drug you want to at the shelter. Yeah, isn't that strange? So some people who are trying to stay clean don't want to come to the shelter. But it's very supervised. You know, my shelter, at any one particular time, I would bet my shelter has at least 20 people on staff there. And at night, we sleep 120 men and about 20 women. So it's not a hellhole, but it's not as nice as, you know, some of the hotels in Washington, D.C., but it's all right. It's all right. You get to take a shower. Again, you have these services and so forth.
Hi, I'm Matt Keever. I'm a visitor. It's wonderful to be here. Please know this takes a lot of courage. I'm sitting here. I was homeless. I'm a lawyer. Progressive fatal disease of alcoholism made me homeless. I started life as an assistant Commonwealth attorney. I was headed for a political career. The disease of alcoholism had other ideas. I ended up homeless. I checked in a hotel and swallowed 75 sleeping pills at the end with a plan to die because I knew God couldn't save me. I'm a good Presbyterian. I trusted God, sort of maybe, but I knew I was beyond his help. And a busybody hotel maid found me the next morning face down in the floor. They got me to a hospital. And thus this glorious life today began 33 years ago. Today, it is an amazing life and experience. It is God's love and grace. I'm active in my Presbyterian church. I've restored myself professionally and socially. It is wonderful. I want it to go on forever. And thank you for what you all do, because you never give up on people like me. Thank you.
Oh. I just want to thank God for all of those 32 years or whatever it was of sobriety, and I trust that God will continue to be with you in your journey, and thank you for your witness.
Susan, I was going to pray for us, but I think you know how to do that better.
Oh.
Would you offer a closing
Sure.
prayer for our congregation as we engage this population that we know about but are honestly not all that proximate to?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let us pray. Oh God of grace, I give you thanks for all the ways that you are moving in each of our lives and in this congregation. Thank you for the compassion that has been shown in this room today. Thank you for your call to the margins. And we ask only for the courage and the trust in your grace to move to the margins. I give you thanks for the witness of this church to people on the margins, and I ask that you will guide them and lead them in the path that Jesus walks. In his name we pray. Amen.
Thank you all for being with us, for sharing, for vulnerability. God bless you, and we'll see many of you in worship